The village of Hollow Creek had always celebrated Halloween with a bit of flair, from decorations to costumes and stories that sent chills down the spines of everyone who heard them. But one year, Halloween would be remembered for more than festivities. It would be remembered for the terrifying tale of the Pumpkin Man. Old Man Hugh was the village's renowned pumpkin farmer. His pumpkins weren't just large. They were enormous, twisted, and gnarled, as though they'd grown with dark secrets buried in their orange flesh. Every year, he displayed his biggest pumpkins at the town's harvest fair, but this year was different. Amidst his pumpkins was one that stood out, a grotesque, oversized gourd with deep ridges, dark patches, and a stem that looked like a twisted claw. The villagers quickly whispered about the devil's pumpkin. Superstitions took hold, with mothers crossing their fingers whenever they passed it and children daring each other to touch it. But Old Man Hugh didn't mind. In fact, he liked the attention. One evening, after the fair had ended, Hugh decided to carve this ominous pumpkin. As he cut into it, he noticed its flesh was tougher, the smell of it was sour, almost rotten. Undeterred, he carved a hideous grin and empty, hollow eyes, making it the most grotesque jack-o'-lantern anyone had ever seen. But a sense of dread nagged him, as if he'd somehow done something wrong, something unnatural. Ignoring his instincts, Hugh placed the pumpkin outside his farmhouse, letting its sinister smile face the village. But that night, something strange happened. The wind picked up, howling like a chorus of eerie voices, and strange shadows danced against the walls of Hugh's farmhouse. The pumpkin seemed to glare, as though mocking him, and he could have sworn he saw its expression change, growing angrier. By dawn, Hugh had had enough. Driven by fear and guilt, he decided to rid himself of it. Under the cover of dawn's early light, Hugh dragged the enormous pumpkin down to Hollow Creek, ignoring its weight and the eerie feeling of its twisted grin. With one great heave, he rolled it into the murky waters and watched as it bobbed downstream, carried away from the village. Relieved, Hugh returned home, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders. But the pumpkin was far from gone. Days passed, and then came Halloween night when the villagers' excitement was at its peak. Families decorated their homes, children dressed as ghouls and goblins, and the town square was buzzing with activity. But as the evening grew darker, so did the rumors. A fisherman claimed he'd seen the pumpkin floating on the lake near the old mill. Some children swore they'd heard strange laughter coming from the riverbank as they walked home from school. And soon, the whispers began that a strange figure had been seen by Hollow Creek. That night, as the last villagers returned to their homes, Marla, the baker's wife, was walking near the edge of the creek. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw something, a figure standing in the shadows, half submerged in the water. She squinted, trying to make out its face, but what she saw made her blood run cold. The figure had a pumpkin for a head, a twisted, carved pumpkin with hollow, blazing eyes and a wicked grin. Marla screamed and ran, but the figure only watched, its hollow eyes glowing with an unnatural fire. As she stumbled into her home, breathless and pale, she locked the door behind her, convinced she had seen a ghost. Word spread quickly, and by morning, everyone knew about the Pumpkin Man. Over the next week, strange things began happening. Shadows flickered in darkened alleyways. Low whispers could be heard in the dead of night, and villagers began feeling a chill that went beyond the autumn air. Children became reluctant to play near the creek, and parents kept their doors and windows locked after dark. But it was those who had seen the figure, the Pumpkin Man, who felt the true terror. They grew pale, their eyes haunted by something they couldn't explain. They couldn't sleep. Nightmares plagued them, and every night, they felt the presence of the creature drawing nearer. Some even claimed to hear it scratching at their doors, waiting to be let in. One evening, after yet another villager had vanished, the townsfolk gathered in the square. Tension crackled in the air as they shared what they knew. Old Man Hugh, feeling a deep, gnawing guilt, finally admitted what he'd done. "I carved that pumpkin, the one they're calling the Devil's Pumpkin," he said, his voice shaking. "I thought it was just superstition. But when I saw the way it looked at me, I knew. I shouldn't have let it go in the river. I created this Pumpkin Man, The villagers murmured in fear and anger, some casting accusing glares at Hugh. But the village elder stepped forward, raising his hands for silence. "We must go to Hollow Creek and end this curse," he declared. "If we don't, the Pumpkin Man will continue to haunt our nights, and our people will keep disappearing." A group of brave villagers, armed with lanterns, ropes, and silver-tipped stakes, set off toward Hollow Creek. Hugh led them, his face pale but determined. As they reached the water's edge, a dense fog rolled in, thicker than any they had ever seen. It clung to them, muffling their voices, making every shadow seem alive. Suddenly, the fog parted, and there, standing knee-deep in the creek, was the Pumpkin Man. His hollow eyes glowed red, his head twisted into a sinister grin. His clothes were soaked, clinging to his skeletal frame, and a faint aura of decay surrounded him. "Welcome," he rasped, his voice like the crunch of dry leaves. "You cannot stop what you've created." The villagers trembled, but the elders stepped forward. "We know what you are, and we will end you." With a laugh that echoed through the fog, the Pumpkin Man raised a bony hand, and the water around him rippled, churning as if alive. Shadows twisted in the fog, forming shapes, ghastly figures with hollow eyes and empty grins, all bearing the twisted features of pumpkins. One by one, they moved toward the villagers, their steps slow, deliberate, yet filled with a dark purpose. The villagers tried to fight, brandishing their lanterns and stakes, but each shadowy figure only seemed to absorb the light, growing stronger as fear spread. Only old Man Hugh stood still, rooted to the spot as the Pumpkin Man drew closer. "This is your doing, Hugh," the Pumpkin Man whispered, his voice dripping with malice. "You carved me, gave me form, and now you will become like me." Hugh felt a chill spread through his veins, freezing him in place. His heart hammered as he looked down, seeing his skin turn a sickly orange, his hands twisting and growing, transforming into gnarled vines. He tried to scream, but his mouth stretched, twisted, forming a hollow, toothy grin. The villagers fled, their courage shattered, leaving Hugh to face his monstrous creation alone. Days passed, and the village fell silent. Those who survived spoke in whispers, and those who had seen the Pumpkin Man fell into silence, their eyes haunted. They locked their doors, avoided the creek, and tried to forget what they had seen. But every Halloween, the Pumpkin Man returned, a twisted figure with a hollow grin, haunting Hollow Creek, searching for new souls to claim. And each year, a new jack-o'-lantern appeared outside Old Man Hugh's farmhouse, with a grin that seemed to mock the living and eyes that glowed with a malevolent fire.